At exactly 2:18 a.m., beneath the freezing granite foundations of Balmoral Castle, an electric drill pierced the reinforced steel of a subterranean strongroom known only to elite palace insiders as Vault 4. This was not a robbery. This was a state-sanctioned extraction, authorized by a king, orchestrated by an heir, and completely hidden from the sleeping world. As the heavy steel door groaned open, breathing out cold, stale air that had remained undisturbed since the earliest, darkest days of Queen Elizabeth's reign, 3 operatives clad in unmarked black stepped inside. They were not looking for crown jewels, priceless tiaras, or gold bullion. They were looking for a single, weathered, wax-sealed envelope that contained the absolute, irrevocable destruction of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. What lay inside that freezing vault was a legal kill switch so devastating, so historically unprecedented, that it would not just strip remaining titles, but completely liquidate a multi-million-dollar Montecito empire overnight. Before we expose the chilling contents of this midnight raid and the hidden royal codicil that changes everything, you must subscribe to this channel and hit the like button right now, because the mainstream media will never show you this. The algorithm does not want this truth uncovered, and our upcoming leaks are going to shake the British monarchy to its absolute core. To understand the sheer, unprecedented brutality of what was extracted from the Balmoral vault that night, you have to realise that the recent silence from across the Atlantic has been a perfectly manufactured illusion. The public was led to believe that a fragile, albeit icy, truce had settled over the divided House of Windsor. That was a masterclass in deception. Behind the towering hedges and iron security gates of their California estate, a new, catastrophic potential. The offensive was being quietly armed. Palace intelligence, working in tandem with private cybersecurity firms, intercepted encrypted communications indicating that a colossal, unredacted data dump was imminent. This was not going to be another memoir filled with petty grievances about bridesmaid dresses or dog bowls. This was rumoured to be the Crown Estate Exposé, a multi-platform media onslaught designed to aggressively target the deeply guarded, offshore financial architectures of the Duchy of Cornwall, alongside unauthorised, selectively edited audio recordings of the late Queen herself. It was a digital guillotine, poised to drop on the neck of the new reign, engineered to permanently shatter the mystique and financial sovereignty of the institution. King Charles, burdened by the heavy, isolating crown and the agonizing grief of a fractured family, initially chose the path of perilous diplomacy. He paced the shadowy, echoing corridors of Clarence House, clutching on to the desperate hope of a father willing to absorb the blows to protect his youngest son from total exile. But the king was looking at the board through the eyes of a parent, while the Prince of Wales was looking at it through the eyes of a sovereign commander facing an existential siege. Prince William understood a brutal, ancient truth of kingship. When the castle walls are being breached from within, you do not offer negotiations. You pour the boiling oil. William's transformation from a grieving brother to a ruthless protector of the realm happened in the absolute silence of a Windsor drawing room, staring into a dying fire while holding a dossier of intercepted Montecito communications. His jaw was set in stone, his eyes devoid of any lingering fraternal warmth. He realised that Charles's agonising hesitation was the monarchy's greatest vulnerability. If the king would not swing the sword, the Prince of Wales would have to guide his hand. This realisation triggered the resurrection of the Ascension Codicil. It is a piece of constitutional dark matter, a deeply buried legal contingency drafted in 1953 under the strictest secrecy by Winston Churchill and Queen Elizabeth's most trusted legal advisors. Designed during the height of the Cold War paranoia, its original purpose was to instantly amputate any member of the royal bloodline who fell under the influence of foreign adversaries, seizing their assets and erasing their standing in a matter of hours. The Codicil bypasses Parliament entirely. It is a direct, sovereign decree that invokes the ancient doctrine of the crown paramount, allowing the reigning monarch to retroactively declare any royal inheritance, title, or sovereign-funded property null and void if the holder commits what is classified as treasure treason, the act of monetizing the crown's private affairs for personal, commercial gain. Prince William did not just find a loophole. He unearthed a weapon of mass legal destruction that had been sleeping beneath the Scottish Highlands for 70 years. When the sealed envelope was finally transported from the freezing depths of Balmoral to the king's private study at Sandringham, the atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly tense. The rain lashed violently against the historic glass panes, matching the storm brewing within the mahogany walls. William presented the ancient, cracking parchment to his father. The document didn't just outline the stripping of the Sussex titles. It contained a financial clawback clause so vicious it borders on the vindictive. By signing the activation order, the king would be legally compelling the immediate repayment of every single pound of sovereign grant money spent on the Duke's security, housing, and royal duties dating back to his 21st birthday. We are talking about an immediate, unchallengeable invoice exceeding £55 million, enforceable through international asset freezing orders that would instantly lock up offshore accounts, California real estate, and pending media contracts. It is not just an excommunication. It is engineered bankruptcy. King Charles stared at his mother's fading signature at the bottom of the codicil, his hands visibly trembling as the crushing weight of history, duty, and paternal betrayal bore down on his shoulders. William stood perfectly still, his voice a low, lethal whisper echoing through the study, telling his father that the ink of the monarchy is blood, and it was time to stop letting it bleed out. The silence in the king's study was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, merciless ticking of a grandfather clock and the driving rain against the Sandringham windows. For what felt like an eternity, King Charles held the heavy, gold-nibbed sovereign fountain pen suspended over the crackling parchment of the Ascension Codicil. The ink seemed to hover, a physical manifestation of a dynasty holding its breath. He was no longer just a father agonizing over a wayward son. He was the physical embodiment of a 1,000-year-old institution that was bleeding out from 1,000 self-inflicted cuts. The coronation oath he had sworn to protect the realm echoed in his mind, drowning out the lingering echoes of paternal mercy. With a sudden, ragged intake of breath, the king pressed the nib to the paper. The scratching sound of the pen was deafening in the quiet room. 3 sharp, jagged strokes of black ink sealed the fate of the Sussexes. As Charles collapsed back into his leather wingback chair, his face pale and etched with the profound, devastating exhaustion of a monarch who had just amputated a limb to save the body, Prince William stepped forward. The Prince of Wales didn't offer a word of comfort. He simply slid the signed codicil into a leather portfolio, his eyes burning with the cold, calculated triumph of a general who had just won a war of attrition. The shadow protocol was no longer a threat. It was an active law. Within 60 seconds of the king's signature drying, a deeply classified, the subterranean communication network beneath Whitehall roared to life. The Lord Chancellor, waiting in a secure bunker, received the encrypted confirmation. The execution of the Ascension Codicil bypassed Parliament, bypassed the courts, and went straight to the deepest arteries of global finance. This was the absolute, unyielding power of the Crown Paramount. Digital kill orders were instantly transmitted to the Bank of England, the Swiss Financial Market Supervisory Authority, and the US Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, masked under top-secret sovereign security protocols. The financial architecture of the Sussex Empire was not just being dismantled, it was being surgically vaporized. In the dead of night. At exactly 4 a.m. London time, a cascading wave of international injunctions slammed into offshore trusts in Delaware, shell companies in the Cayman Islands, and private banking accounts in Geneva. £55 million of calculated sovereign liability crystallized in an instant. The global banking system, acting under the unchallengeable jurisdiction of a head of state invoking national security, froze every single asset tied to the Duke and Duchess. Thousands of miles away, dawn was just beginning to break over the fog-drenched Pacific coastline of California. The sprawling, multi-million-dollar Montecito estate sat in pristine, manicured silence, entirely unaware that a catastrophic, the legal and financial tsunami had just eradicated its foundations. The alarm didn't come in the form of a dramatic police raid or a blazing headline. It came in the form of a cascading, invisible digital failure. It started precisely at 8:15 a.m. Pacific Time. A high-end Hollywood crisis management firm, retained on a massive monthly fee to orchestrate the upcoming Crown Estate Exposé, received an automated red flag notification from their banking portal. The Sussex Sovereign Trust, the central artery of their financial independence, had been classified as locked under a foreign state freezing order. Minutes later, the private security contractors guarding the perimeter of the estate received immediate termination notices from their payroll providers. The holding accounts were frozen solid. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere rapidly mutated from the usual morning routine to sheer, unadulterated panic. Frantic, enraged phone calls were placed to London banking liaisons, high-powered wealth managers, and royal fixers, but every single call met the same terrifying fate. Dead air, automated messages, or terrified lawyers refusing to speak on unsecured lines. The realization of what had actually transpired hit the California camp like a physical blow. The highly paid, aggressive legal teams assembled to wage a glamorous, transatlantic public relations war suddenly realized they were utterly obsolete. They had prepared for defamation suits, injunctions against book publishing, and tabloid skirmishes. They had never prepared for a weaponized, Cold War-era constitutional edict. The sheer, ruthless genius of Prince William's strategy became horrifyingly clear. By classifying the Montecito media deals as treasure treason, the Crown had successfully gagged the Sussexes through absolute financial suffocation. The much-feared data dump, the selectively edited audio recordings of the late Queen, the exposé on the Duchy of Cornwall, it was all suddenly paralysed. Every server hosting their files, every legal retainer funding their lawsuits, every non-disclosure agreement they planned to buy out, rely on a financial pipeline that was now sealed in a sovereign deep freeze. If they attempted to release a single piece of damaging material, they would be acting in direct violation of an international freezing order, instantly transforming a civil family dispute into a federal criminal matter, triggering immediate extradition requests under sovereign security treaties. They were trapped. The Montecito mansion had transformed overnight into a luxurious, sun-drenched prison. Cut off from their capital, isolated from their allies who were now terrified of being implicated in a sovereign legal strike, and facing absolute public ruin, the Duke and Duchess found themselves pushed to the absolute brink of destruction. The royal machinery had proven that it could crush rebellion with terrifying, silent efficiency. But as the initial shock wore off, the suffocating desperation inside the California compound began to breed a terrifying, unprecedented new strategy. The Montecito camp realized that if they could not fight a conventional war against the endless resources of the British Crown, they would have to resort to the nuclear option. They realized they held one final, devastating card. A card that the ancient architects of the Ascension Codicil had never anticipated. It was a vulnerability deeply intertwined with royal blood, international human rights law, and the very line of succession itself. As the California sun set on a ruined empire, a new, far more dangerous retaliation was being drafted. One that would target the very heart of the monarchy's future. The desperation inside the Montecito estate quickly fermented into a chilling, calculated realization. The Ascension Codicil, in its brutal and sweeping execution, contained a fatal, microscopic flaw. A legal paradox that the ancient architects of the Cold War era had never anticipated. By invoking the doctrine of the Crown Paramount and classifying the Sussexes' media ventures as treasure, treason, King Charles and Prince William had retroactively nullified the royal bloodline privileges of the Duke's entire household under the guise of national security. But in doing so, they had inadvertently stripped Archie and Lilibet of their internationally recognised diplomatic protections. The Sussexes' high-powered, newly pro bono human rights attorneys operating out of Geneva saw the vulnerability immediately. This was no longer a domestic dispute over noble titles or sovereign trust funds. In the eyes of international law, it was the state-sponsored persecution and financial starvation of royal minors. The drafting of the Retaliation did not happen in a sunlit Hollywood boardroom. It happened on encrypted servers routed through The Hague. The California camp was preparing to file an unprecedented, catastrophic emergency injunction not in the British High Court, but in the International Criminal Court, accusing the reigning British monarch of rendering his own grandchildren effectively stateless. The sheer, terrifying audacity of the counterstrike was staggering. If the international tribunals accepted the filing, King Charles would not be summoned as a grieving father or a protected sovereign, but as a head of state accused of weaponizing the formidable machinery of the crown against defenseless children. The Montecito camp was engineering a diplomatic hostage situation of apocalyptic proportions. They threatened to invoke the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, forcing the British government into a catastrophic, highly publicized trial on the world stage. Imagine the devastating global optics, the ancient, golden, impenetrable fortress of the British Empire being dragged into a modern international tribunal, forced to publicly justify a draconian, hidden, constitutional decree against a toddler and a young boy. The total financial freeze that Prince William had so ruthlessly orchestrated was instantly reframed by the California lawyers as an act of economic warfare and human rights violation, primed to be broadcast to billions. The fortress William had built to protect his family was suddenly surrounded by a modernized international siege engine that did not recognize the divine right of kings, immune to the shadows of the Privy Council. But the true paralyzing blow, the poisoned arrow aimed directly at Prince William's heart, lay in a heavily encrypted secondary file attached to the draft injunction. This is where the absolute darkest secrets of the royal archives bleed into the present. Remember the whispers of Princess Diana's lost 1995 letter? The one locked away in a private estate, long thought to be a mere palace myth. The California camp had quietly obtained a verified, high-resolution scan of the original handwritten document. In that haunting, fragile letter, Diana did not just vaguely predict the institutional erasure of her younger son. She detailed a specific, historical precedent of senior palace aides weaponizing constitutional loopholes to threaten her own children's security during the bitterest, most paranoid days of the royal divorce. Prince Harry wasn't just fighting to unfreeze a £55 million trust. He was threatening to submit his dead mother's final, desperate testimony as sworn, unsealed legal evidence of a generational pattern of systemic, institutional abuse. The psychological warfare had come full circle with devastating precision. To win this war, Prince William would have to publicly cross-examine his own mother's ghost on an international witness stand, dissecting her paranoia and trauma before a ravenous global audience, forever tainting the legacy he had sworn his life to protect. The British monarchy now stands on a terrifying, crumbling precipice. King Charles remains isolated in the freezing stone corridors of Balmoral, staring into the abyss of a constitutional paradox that threatens to completely unravel the modern Commonwealth. The sovereign asset freeze remains active, suffocating the Montecito Empire by the hour, but the countdown to the Hague filing has officially begun. It is a terrifying, high-stakes game of aristocratic Russian roulette, where the loser loses absolutely everything: history, legacy, and the very future survival of the Windsor bloodline. Will the king shatter his own midnight edict and surrender to international blackmail to protect the crown's fragile image? Or will Prince William push the final button, risking the complete destruction of his brother's family and the historical desecration of his mother's memory to preserve a 1,000-year-old dynasty? The absolute climax of this sovereign war is unfolding in the darkest shadows right now, and the ultimate, catastrophic strike is only days away. We have exclusive, encrypted access to the incoming Hague filings, the redacted financial kill orders, and the unblurred scans of Princess Diana's final, desperate warning. You need to be here when we release them. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and sound off in the comments below with who you think will survive this royal Armageddon, because the real battle for the crown has only just begun. and we are your only source for the absolute, unfiltered truth.